and welcome to Sumpter Valley Dredge State Heritage Area. My name is Karen Spencer, and I will be your program host. This park is an interpretive park. We have several trails throughout our 77 acres offering both natural habitat for wildlife and historic mining displays. We are also partnering with Sumpter Valley Railroad Restoration to include the historic narrow gauge railroad in our park. But the focal point of the heritage area is Sumpter Valley Gold Dredge. A gold dredge is a floating mechanized placer mine which works the gold-bearing gravels beneath the surface of the river. This dredge operated from 1935 until 1954 when it was shut down in this location, never to be moved again. Digging its own pond as it worked, over 1,600 acres were dredged, leaving miles of processed gravels called tailings in its wake. You can see them all up and down the Sumpter Valley. Before we begin our tour, let's visit with Henry Konowski from the State Historic Preservation Office.
Good day. I thought we would take a brief overview of the dredge operation by looking at this model which was locally constructed. Basically, the operation of the dredge consisted of the 72 digger buckets, each weighing about a ton, extracting gravel from the riverbed and working its way up to the third story level. The gravel would drop into the trommel in which it would be sorted, processed, and the extra rock that was not containing gold would go out the stacker to the rear. The Sumpter Valley Dredge is the third dredge to work in the valley. The first dredge was constructed in the end of the 19th century, and as the dredge operated and became worn out, it would be dismantled, components utilized in the subsequent dredge. So a lot of the pieces we have in the current Sumpter Valley Dredge really started out in the first dredge in the late 19th century. The dredge hull was usually the first element constructed and then launched. Subsequently, the steel superstructure and various operational components of the dredge were placed. Here we have a photograph of Mrs. Cullers, the dredge owner, getting ready to christen the dredge in 1934, and the actual launching of the dredge shortly thereafter with the steel superstructure in place. Once the dredge was floating, the process would begin to assemble the rest of the operational equipment. Here we have a photograph of the trommel being loaded in the stern section through the steel superstructure, a photograph of the framing for the house, three-story house element of the dredge. Here's an image of the 72 digger buckets being loaded onto the digger bucket arm. Here's a photograph of the workers assembling the rear stacker arm and placing its canvas cover. After the dredge was completed its construction, the crew assembled for the traditional group photograph to demonstrate the pride of their effort. Here we have a photograph of the dredge completed with its new coat of whitewash paint, but it has yet to operate. During the dredge's operation, it began to take on more of the character we now see it in today. And the dredge operated 365 days a year, but for Christmas and 4th of July, and it operated even in the worst weather conditions. Here you can see ice forming in the pond around the area of operation. Here we have a photograph of the fruits of all of these labors is a sample of a gold brick that was smelted on site, being held by one of the crew bosses. Over the last several years, State Parks has taken on rehabilitation of the dredge, much in the form in which it was originally constructed. In other words, we've tried to maintain the vernacular of its original architecture and fabrication. In this regard, we hope that as a result, when you tour the dredge, it'll be very hard to discern between its original construction and the more recent rehabilitation. When State Parks first took on this project, we found a dredge that was basically submerged and in an advanced state of deterioration. Our first efforts were to stabilize the hull and free it of water. In this regard, our efforts included sending divers into the hull area to ascertain its condition and looking at other structural concerns before we felt it would be appropriate to invite the public on board. And so what we have here is a series of images that start out from the initial days of the acquisition of the dredge by state parks, showing the stern section, bow section underwater, and some of the efforts that were initiated to stabilize the structure, such as putting a foundation under the vessel because it no longer floats. From that point, we decided to take on a reconstruction of the hull, much in the manner it was originally constructed, and begin to work our way up through the structure up to the third floor level. Well, that's about it for our short history of the dredge. And now Karen would like to take you on a tour to actually show you what we've been doing.
We are now boarding the bow of the dredge. Behind me, you'll notice the bucket line, or the digging arm of the dredge. There are 72 one-ton buckets, which could dig to the depth of 13 feet. Each bucket could hold 10 cubic feet, and over a year that would average about 100 acres. Imagine the wear and tear that would take place on the leading edge of the bucket, and what it would take to change each bucket when it became worn. The dredging company came up with the idea of an interchangeable lip. So when that bucket did become worn, they would only have to replace the lip. We were able to persuade several of our local citizens who are actual dredge workers to join us today. They will be explaining some of the machinery that we will see and describe the jobs that they did. Shall we go inside? Hi, Hank.
Hi, Karen.
What was your job on the dredge?
I was head oiler.
And what does a head oiler do?
We had to maintain the front end of the dredge and the lower deck.
Can you describe what this piece of equipment did?
Yes, it was a boiler used for heating the dredge. I mean, as if in the times, but it done a fairly good job.
Did it keep you warm in the winter?
Well, at 40 below, it maintained. It could have been better.
And what kind of fuel did it burn?
It used oil.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what this machinery did?
Yes, it is the winches that you see here are used for pulling the boat back and forth, the bow lines. There's the bow lines and stern lines, and the power cable lines and whatnot. But the bow lines were used for swinging the boat back and forth, and the stern lines were used just for stepping the boat ahead. They'd tighten the stern lines and pull the boat ahead, but that's what they were used for.
And this is the brake system here?
Yes, that was controlled from up in the winch room. And like I said, when they was pulling this way, or right to left, they would throw the friction out and set the brake, and which would stop the dredge, and then they'd turn the winch line on for the other side, and to pull the boat the other way. Yeah, this is the bearing here, and this is the grease. We used to grease the bearing, and to keep it lubricated and keep it from getting hot. This is the stern lines here, this one and that one back there, and they were used for stepping the dredge ahead. But what they had to do, they would tighten both stern lines and the bow lines, and get them tight, and then they would raise the spud. And once it was up, well, then they would pull the frictions in on the clutches in on the stern lines, which would tighten lines in the back, and then it would go ahead and they would take the bow lines and guide the dredge ahead till they got approximately an 8-foot step. Then they would hit the bow lines real tight and set them, and they'd set the brakes on the stern lines and then drop the spud. And this down here was the way we used to grease these. But we'd have to grease these once a day is on the stern lines. This is a high pressure pump we used it went up in the trommel and it supplied the water up there, the nozzles. And it was also used for hosing the decks off. We used to hose the decks off off of the bow and the front end, the gravel, and we used to come right on through, back through here, and hose everything out the stern end. It was done once at the end of your shift. We had to clean up for the next oiler.
So Hank, this is the digging winch?
Yes, this is a digger motor. Digger motor used to set over here, and which drove this pulley here. And when they wanted to step ahead, they would take and raise the ladder up, and that's what raised the ladder up. And it also drove up around here this belt, which went up to drove the bucket line, the big bull gears upstairs.
This is our winchman, Willie Dickinson. Willie, tell us what a winchman did.
Well, the primary thing that a winchman done is he controlled the boat, the movement of it, the movement of the bucket line, and everything is controlled as far as the movement is concerned up here. Now these two levers here are brake levers for the stern lines, and the frictions were right here. They've taken the handles off, but these are air frictions which throwed it into this swing winch, which is down below us here. And you could throw all of these in at once if you needed to, because that's the way it's set up down there. But like you wanted to move the boat across the pond or just step it ahead, you picked up these stern lines, released the brakes after just as you throw the friction in, and then this is the spud here, and this one's the power line. And the spud, which is back there, you can't see it from here, but it's like an anchor that went straight down, and you picked it up to where it was up above the deck of the hull back there, and then threw the friction out and held it with the brake. The power line, if you were going this direction, moving sideways this way, why you threw the power line friction in and set the brake just about halfway. If you're going that way, and picked up the power line, because it come across the pond and hooked into up there, we can't see it from here, but there was a swinging arm up there that the power line hooked into. If you was going the other way, you didn't put the friction in, you just released the brake. So, and as the boat moved this direction, it let the power line out, which was on this cable, and that cable was a trolley for the big electric power line. This is the starboard bow line, and this is the friction here. This is a port bow line, and this is the friction here. This is the brake for the bucket ladder, and this is the friction for the bucket ladder here. Right up here under where you have this 2x4 now, the first day I ever was a winchman, not just a one breaking in. Well, Alvy Gardner's the one that taught me how to winch, but I wrote down on this, 28th day of May, 1948. And the first day I went to work on the dredge was the 9th day of May, 1946.
We have moved to the stern of the dredge where we're meeting with stern oiler Norman Hansen. Norm, what was the hourly wage of an oiler?
Well, I was getting $1.05 when I quit. And we worked, the dredge run 24 hours a day, 3 8-hour shifts, and you ate your lunch on your spare time if you had any. If you didn't get anything to eat. And we got 2 days off a week on the day shift.
And I hear you had 2 vacation days a year?
2 vacations, Christmas and 4th of July.
Norm, can you explain a little bit about your job?
Well, of course, first thing I got to grease all this stuff. And then this is a cylinder that controls the rock chute. And whenever they stepped the dredge ahead, well, they had to close the rock chute, and that rocked the spud in. So, and then when the winchman had all the rock he wanted, why, he'd give you a signal, and then we'd open the rock chute. Now this is our bell system here, and as you can see, it's one bell was stop, and then 2 bells was start up, 3 bells was called winch room, and then this one, the rock, that's the one that's the main one here, because when the winchman called for rock, well, then you had to close the rock chute, and then when he had all the rock he wanted, he opened it. And if a big stick or something come through, sometime in the wintertime, big chunks of ice would get stuck in the tumbler there, and we'd have to stop and dig them out by hand. And then it said down there, answer all bells. And that's, so if you didn't answer your bell, why, then they'd stop the dredge and see what was wrong, because they didn't want anybody to get killed on the thing. And one of the big grease jobs was greasing all these rollers that went up the stacker. We had to grease them every shift. And then we had a hose, and we had to hose all the water out of the gravel with the water. And then over here on the wall over there, they had 2 rheostats. One of them run the stacker belt, and one of them run the tumbler, and it was up to the stern oiler to operate those when they was needed. This dredge is just like a big goose, and the dirt comes into one end and goes through the trommel and out the stacker. And this is the stacker out there. It's 100 feet long, and it has to be that long so that the gravel gets out of the other end, don't fill the pond in behind the dredge. And it was kind of a scary thing sometime when you're out there on there greasing it and washing the gravel out of it, because when the dredge is running, that stacker's kind of bouncing up and down and don't stay in one spot. And one thing about this dredge, it's always kind of amazing that nobody ever really got seriously injured on this boat all the time it was running. And some people, maybe they're superstitious or maybe not, but they always kind of thought that Joe Bush was a guardian angel here, and he's an angel or a ghost, or nobody really knew what he was or who he was. But a lot of times when the dredge was shut down, why, old Joe Bush you could hear him walking up the stairways, or a lot of times things would happen that there was no answer for, except that Joe Bush done it.
This impressive gear is the bull gear. Wesley Dickinson, another former dredge worker, will tell us more about it and the machinery that collected the gold. Hi, Wes.
Hi, Karen. Well, there's 2 of these bull gears, one on each side of the tumbler. They're both approximately 15 feet in diameter. The shaft that they're hooked to is probably 12 or 13 inches in diameter. Okay, the bucket line runs on 2 tumblers, one on the lower end of the line and the one on the upper end of the bucket. The power is generated in this tumbler on the upper end, and that is what the bull gears are hooked to. This is the upper end of the bucket line where the gold-bearing gravel is dumped into the hopper, and the hopper is where the gravel and stuff is channeled into the trommel screen. We will tell you more about that shortly. This large pulley here is what drives the big bull gears that turns the bucket line. It comes from a 250 horsepower electric motor on the main deck. Here's the hopper that we told you about previously. Bucket line dumps the rocks and gravel and dirt into the hopper, and it's channeled into the trommel screen. The trommel screen is running right underneath us here, under this floor. And here you can see it here. It has holes all over it that is probably a 1/2 inch in diameter to 3/4 of an inch maybe. The screen is turning constantly. The water is washing the sand and gravel, and the sand is going out into the jigs. The gravel is going onto the stacker belt, which takes it out and dumps it behind the boat. And now let's go over here and look at another interesting piece of equipment. Now this is a system they had to clean the water. The water that they used in the jigs and different parts of the operation needed to be somewhat clean, and it was pumped from the dredge pond, where quite often grass and debris would get into the pumps and get pumped in onto the boat. So it came up down there, and it would come over this screen, and it would screen the water, and these blades here would wipe the debris, the grass and so forth, and it would fall into this line here and go down and get on the stacker belt and go on out on the rock pile. This is the one side of the trommel screen where the gold-bearing sand would come out of the trommel screen and run down over the jigs. Now, the jigs was set on the lower floor, one floor below us here. The jigs would suck the sand and stuff down, jiggle it down into the jigs, and what was left over would run on off over these riffles and go out and end up at the, dumping in the pond behind the boat. The whole thing is based on water and gravity. The sand and stuff the jigs took down would end up going into a pump in the hull, which we call the Wilfred pump, and I assume it was the name of the company that built the pump. It was a sand pump anyway that pumped the sand back up to another set of jigs on the other side of the boat. Now this is the lower end of the trommel screen. The trommel screen's approximately 6 feet in diameter. This is where the washed gravel and stuff drops onto the stacker belt, which Norman Hanson's probably already told you all about. Okay, this is where the sand that's from the Wilfred pump comes up into this tank here, and then is moved on up into the area up here where it is dropped into 4 jigs, which in turn ran it on down to the bottom floor to the last 2 jigs in the amalgam barrel. Okay, this is the area where the final process of gathering the gold took place. Since I worked here, there was additions this room to my left, and then this caged-in area here, which possibly was used for some reason for security reasons. At the time I worked here, we had a amalgam barrel, which is the final place where the main gold was picked up. And this black sand came from the jigs upstairs, down through 2 jigs on this layer, and then from them jigs it went through the amalgam barrel, and then out and onto some riffles, and that sand was actually picked up there and run through this ball mill on the left here. The purpose of the ball mill was to clean the gold that the silver wouldn't pick up, so that they could pick it up. They would, after running the black sand in this ball mill, then they would put it in barrels down here, and then the jig men, or the gold people, whatever you would want to call them, would set and use a regular gold pan and pan the gold that was in the black sand there. And that was a final method of recovering the gold.
So there you have it, the history of Sumpter Valley Dredge straight from the horse's mouth, or so to speak. But our story isn't finished yet. Let's talk with Area 6 Manager Rick Taylor to find out what the future holds for the Sumpter Valley Dredge. Hi, Rick.
Hello, Karen. Since the acquisition of the dredge back in 1993, we have been able to do a master plan in 1994 and in 1995 start the evaluation of what was needed to rehabilitate the dredge. We have brought in a team of contractors that have lifted the dredge, floated it, placed some gravel-based pedestal underneath it, and set the dredge back down to give it its appearance of floating on the pond as it is today. The next year we were able to evaluate exactly what else was needed to be done on the dredge. At that time, however, we discovered that there was going to be further work that needed to be done to stabilize the dredge and the hull structure. In 1997, we were able to bring in another contractor who rehabilitated the hull structure to allow visitor access to it the next year. That same year, we were able to add the docks that you see outside the dredge today. They have interpretive panels with audio posts that you may push and listen to the story of the dredge. We have access throughout the first floor of the dredge and on the bow section, and it gives a nice flow pattern with the docks in place to allow that. In addition, this year we hope with the continuing grants and so forth that we receive through the help of the Friends of the Sumpter Valley Dredge, that we will continue to do repair work inside, which may allow second floor visitation. Along with that, we will be replacing some of the windows that you see missing today, doing some more exterior siding repair and painting or staining of that siding to protect it. On the outside of the dredge, in the park itself, the Sumpter Valley Railroad Association is hoping to build their depot this summer, which will allow the better access to the trains for the visitors. It'll possibly lay further track and bridges that will allow the train to loop the dredge and back to the original location at the depot. And we'll continue to do outside exterior work such as more trails, picnic table sites, and that sort of thing. Long term, down the road, we hope to eventually build an interpretation center that will house museum artifacts and more interpretive panels regarding the dredging history and mining history in the area, as well as other types of mining. Picnic areas and parking lots will also be enhanced in the area.
Thank you for sharing that look into the future with us, Rick. As you can see, Sumpter Valley Dredge State Heritage Area is truly unique among Oregon's state parks. If you haven't joined us for a visit yet, we look forward to seeing you. Sumpter Valley Dredge State Heritage Area is open from May 15th until September 15th, and self-guided tours are offered 7 days a week, 9 until 4. To reach Sumpter Valley Dredge State Heritage Area, travel southwest from Baker City on Highway 7, approximately 27 miles. You'll reach State Highway 220, take a right, and travel another 3 miles to the city of Sumpter. Thank you for joining us.